A man thought he had rescued a tiny puppy trembling in the cold rain. Its small body was drenched, its dark eyes wide open, as if begging for a bit of warmth. He held it close, wrapped it in his jacket, and brought it home, believing he had done the right thing. But only a few days later, strange things began to happen. Sounds no dog should ever make, movements that were sharp, swift, and unsettling, and its eyes, glowing in the dark, as if reflecting something far more wild. A rising sense of unease pushed him to take the creature to a vet. But when the doctor examined the tiny animal, his face instantly went pale, his hands trembling, and his voice dropping into a heavy whisper. What he had brought home that night was never a puppy, and the truth behind it was far more frightening than he could ever imagine. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more stories that may touch your heart in unexpected ways. The rain had just begun to fall, a light drizzle tapping against the windshield as Ethan drove down the lonely country road. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels asleep, where every shadow along the roadside seems alive. He was exhausted from a long shift and eager to get home, but fate had a different plan, waiting just a few miles ahead. Up ahead, something moved. A small, dark shape trembled at the edge of the pavement, half hidden in the tall, rain-soaked grass. Ethan slowed down, squinting through the streaks of water sliding down his windshield. At first, he thought it might be a kitten, or maybe just debris blown onto the road by the storm. But then the shape lifted its head, and two enormous, glassy eyes reflected back in the beam of his headlights. Ethan's heart clenched. It was tiny, so tiny, it could have fit in the palm of his hand. Its slick, jet-black fur clung tightly to its small frame. Its oversized ears drooped under the weight of the rain. The little creature shook violently, as if the cold night might swallow it whole. "Oh no," Ethan muttered, pulling over. The wind slapped against him as he stepped out of the truck, water seeping into his shirt. He crouched low, approaching the trembling animal slowly, so he wouldn't frighten it. Up close, it looked even more fragile. Too fragile. Its little chest fluttered with each breath, its claws barely gripping the muddy ground. His first thought formed instantly puppy. Someone must have abandoned it, left it here in the middle of nowhere, in the rain to fend for itself. Anger surged in Ethan's chest at the thought of such cruelty. "Who could do this?" he whispered, gently extending his hand. The creature didn't bark. It didn't whimper. Instead, it let out the faintest squeak, high-pitched, soft, almost like the cry of a kitten. It clung desperately to Ethan's fingers as he lifted it from the ground. The weight, or the lack of it, nearly broke him. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Holding it against his chest to shield it from the rain, Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just picking up a stray animal. This was saving a life. He hurried back to his truck and reached behind the seat for an old flannel shirt. Wrapping the trembling creature inside it, he whispered, "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." The tiny body curled into the warmth as Ethan started the engine again. Every few seconds he glanced at the bundle beside him. Something about it tugged at him, its enormous eyes, the odd shape of its head, the way it seemed both aware and exhausted at the same time. Still, he brushed the unease aside. It was cold, wet, and alone. Any strange details could wait until morning. As the rain grew heavier, he pulled into his driveway. A chill crawled up his spine, though the truck's heater was blowing warm air. He held the little creature close as he hurried to his front door. Stepping inside the warm glow of his home, he whispered again to reassure the animal, but also himself. "Don't worry. I'll take care of you." He set the small bundle on a soft towel in his living room. The creature blinked slowly in the lamplight, its enormous eyes glistening. Ethan gently dabbed its damp fur with the towel. It squeaked again, clutching the fabric with surprising strength for something so tiny. His heart softened instantly. He warmed a shallow dish of milk and placed it on the floor. The little one sniffed, then wobbled forward and began lapping eagerly. Relief swept over Ethan. "That's it. You're going to be okay," he murmured. When it finished its round, Belly sagged adorably. It waddled toward Ethan and pressed its tiny body against his leg. He lifted it again, surprised by how light and delicate it was. It curled immediately into his chest, tucking its head beneath his chin. That night, Ethan made a small bed from a shoebox lined with an old sweatshirt. The creature crawled into it. But when he stepped away, it squeaked loudly, scrambling as if it didn't want to be alone. Ethan chuckled. All right. You want company?" Against his better judgment, he let it sleep on his pillow. He lay awake for hours listening to the tiny breaths beside him, feeling its warmth against his cheek. By morning, he already had a name for it. Shadow. Small, dark, mysterious, just a little silhouette that had appeared out of nowhere on a rainy night. And Ethan had no idea that rescuing it would unravel a mystery far bigger than he could ever imagine. As the days passed, Shadow settled into Ethan's home as though it had always belonged there. But even in those early moments of comfort, one thing was obvious. Shadow wasn't like any puppy Ethan had ever raised before. Shadow didn't bark, not once. There were no playful yips in the morning, no whines when hungry, no excited barks at the door. Instead, it made odd chirping sounds. Sometimes soft, like a tiny bird. Sometimes sharp, cutting through the quiet of the house in a way that made the hairs on Ethan's arms stand on end. And every time Shadow's wide black eyes would fix on him as if studying his reaction. Its movements were strange, too. Unlike the clumsy, wobbly steps of young puppies, Shadow glided across the floor with unnerving grace. Its tiny claws clicked gently on the hardwood, but its body moved like a shadow sliding over the surface. Ethan once watched stunned as Shadow scrambled up the back of the couch in a single smooth motion, balancing on the edge like a miniature predator surveying its territory. Friends who came to visit noticed immediately. "That doesn't look like a puppy," one neighbor murmured, watching Shadow creep silently across the windowsill. "Are you sure you know what that is?" Ethan would laugh it off even though he felt the same unease deep in his chest. He didn't want to admit it, but something about Shadow wasn't normal, not even close. At night, the oddities became impossible to ignore. Shadow seemed most alive when the house went dark. While Ethan struggled to sleep, the creature prowled silently from room to room. Sometimes Ethan would wake to see two faintly glowing eyes staring at him from across the bedroom eyes that caught the moonlight in an unnatural way. Despite all of it, Ethan felt deeply bonded to the little creature. Shadow still curled up on his chest whenever he sat on the couch. It chirped softly whenever he came home, as if greeting him. And in its own strange way, it seemed to understand him. When he spoke, Shadow tilted its head, ears twitching, tail flicking in recognition. Still, unease lingered. Food became another puzzle. Shadow refused dog kibble no matter how Ethan disguised it. Warm milk worked for a while, soft scraps from dinner too. But then Shadow began showing a strange preference, sniffing curiously at raw meat. Once when Ethan tried to pull a piece away, Shadow let out a faint hiss. Puppies didn't hiss. Ethan told himself it was fine. Shadow was just different. Maybe it had a rough start. Maybe it needed time to adapt. The bond they shared was real, so real that Ethan felt protective of it, almost fiercely so. But the tipping point came one quiet afternoon in the backyard. Ethan brought Shadow outside to let it feel the grass beneath its paws. Across the fence, the neighbor's dog, a large shepherd, began barking loudly, tail wagging, sensing something new. Instead of cowering or trembling, Shadow stiffened in Ethan's arms. Its tiny body vibrated, not with fear, but with something else, something darker. Shadow let out a low, guttural sound Ethan had never heard before, a sound no puppy should be able to make. The shepherd dog went dead. Silent ears, flattening tail dropping between its legs. It backed away, whining softly, as if something primal inside it recognized danger. Ethan's blood ran cold. He stood frozen, clutching Shadow tightly, unsure what he was holding anymore. It nuzzled against his chest afterward, innocent and fragile, but the moment replayed in his mind long after they returned indoors. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every small chirp from Shadow made his pulse jump. Every flicker of movement in the room made him tense. He cared deeply for the little creature, but what if he was wrong about it? What if his love was blinding him? By morning, the truth gnawed at him so fiercely that he couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to know. He had to be sure. With trembling hands, he gently placed Shadow into a small carrier lined with a blanket. The creature chirped softly, blinking up at him with those enormous eyes, as if sensing something was wrong. "It's okay, buddy," Ethan whispered, voice shaking. "We're just going to make sure you're healthy." The drive to the clinic felt endless. Every bump in the road rattled Ethan's nerves. Shadow watched him silently from inside the carrier, too calm for a creature that was supposed to be a puppy. When Ethan finally pulled into the parking lot of the veterinary clinic, his palms were slick with sweat. Inside the waiting room buzzed with barking dogs, meowing cats, and the smell of disinfectant. Ethan sat in the far corner, clutching the carrier close. A little girl pointed at it excitedly. "Mommy, look, a tiny puppy." But her mother frowned uneasily at Shadow's enormous eyes and unnatural stillness. Before Ethan had time to overthink, a nurse stepped into the room. "Ethan, we're ready for you." He swallowed hard. It was time. It was time to learn the truth. Ethan followed the nurse down a narrow hallway into an exam room, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Moments later, Dr. Turner entered, a kind-faced man with decades of experience. "So what do we have here today?" he asked warmly. Ethan lifted Shadow from the carrier and placed the little creature onto the steel table. Under the bright exam light, Shadow blinked its oversized eyes, glistening ears twitching at every sound. Dr. Turner leaned in, his expression casual at first. Looks young. Very young. Where did you find it?" "On the side of the road," Ethan explained quickly. "It was raining, and I thought it was a puppy someone dumped. I couldn't just leave it there." The vet didn't respond. He adjusted his glasses, gently touching Shadow's head, lifting a paw, checking each tiny claw with deliberate care. Then he examined its jawline, then its ears, then its unusually large eyes. The longer the exam went on, the more Dr. Turner's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, then to something else entirely. Something colder. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong, Doctor?" Turner didn't answer immediately. He stepped back, staring at the creature as though trying to process what he was seeing. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his clipboard. Shadow chirped. The odd, high-pitched sound echoed through the sterile room. Dr. Turner froze. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor. Slowly, he raised his eyes to Ethan, his face noticeably pale. "You said you thought this was a puppy," he murmured. "Yes," Ethan said quickly. "Isn't it?" Dr. Turner swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost disbelieving. "No, this is not a puppy." Silence crashed down on the room. Ethan blinked, staring at Shadow, who sat quietly on the table looking back at him with those enormous, unblinking eyes. A cold shiver crept up his spine. "What do you mean?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. The vet didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in again almost reluctantly, as if worried about touching the creature a second time. His hands moved cautiously, as though he were handling something dangerous. Finally, he straightened and exhaled slowly. I need to know exactly where you found this. Every detail. Tell me right now. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He replayed the storm, the roadside, the trembling shape in the grass. Nothing about that moment prepared him for the intensity now simmering in Dr. Turner's eyes. Please, Ethan said. Just tell me what's going on. Dr. Turner pulled up a chair, sitting down heavily. Listen carefully, he said. What you've been raising, it's not a dog, it's a cub, likely from a wild species. Ethan stared. Wild like. A fox, Dr. Turner shook his head grimly. No, not a fox, and not any ordinary animal you'd expect to see around here. Based on the claws, the jaw structure, the size of the eyes, I'd say it's a young wolf, or possibly something rarer. Maybe even an exotic predator smuggled into the area. A wolf. The word hit Ethan like a blow. It felt impossible to connect that word to the fragile creature curled on the table. No, that doesn't make sense, Ethan whispered. Wolves don't just show up on roadsides around here. You're right, Dr. Turner replied. That's why this worries me. If it is a wolf pup, then its mother was either nearby, or worse, killed. Wolves don't abandon their young without reason. He paused, his expression darkening. But there's another possibility. Ethan leaned forward, dread clawing at his chest. What possibility? Dr. Turner sighed. Illegal wildlife trafficking. The room felt colder. Exotic animals are smuggled all the time, the vet continued. Cubs are easy to transport. They fetch high prices. Many die before they're sold. When traffickers get scared, or authorities get too close, they abandon the animals. On roadsides, in forests, anywhere. Ethan swallowed hard. So you're saying someone dumped him? It wouldn't be the first time, Dr. Turner said. A rainy roadside fits the pattern perfectly. Ethan rubbed his face with trembling hands. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together in a way that made his stomach twist. The chirping sounds, the glowing eyes, the precise movements, the way Shadow had made a full-grown shepherd back away in terror. Shadow wasn't a puppy. He never had been. Dr. Turner's voice softened but carried weight. Ethan, don't doubt your intentions. You saved its life. But wild animals, even cubs, don't lose their instincts. They can't be raised like dogs. Keeping one is dangerous. For you, and for the animal. Shadow crawled toward Ethan, chirping softly, pressing its head into his arm with innocent trust. The sight nearly broke Ethan's heart. But look at him, he whispered. He needs me. Dr. Turner shook his head gently. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let go. Ethan closed his eyes, torn between fear and fierce protectiveness. The truth was undeniable now. Whatever Shadow was, he didn't belong in a house, and Ethan's life was about to change in ways he never expected. The room felt colder now, though nothing had changed except the weight of Dr. Turner's words. Ethan sat, frozen, staring at Shadow, who nestled quietly on the towel, licking its paws with eerie calm. He wanted desperately to see just a frightened puppy, but the truth had cracked that illusion wide open. Dr. Turner pulled up a chair and leaned forward, his expression grave but patient. Ethan, he began carefully, I need you to listen. What you've been raising, it's not a dog. It's a cub, likely from a wild species. Maybe a young wolf, maybe something rarer. The words hit Ethan like cold water. A wolf, he whispered. The idea felt impossible, absurd. Even how could this tiny creature, this fragile little being that curled against his chest at night, be something so dangerous? Dr. Turner nodded slowly. I know it's hard to believe, but the features are unmistakable. The claws, the teeth, the eyes, the movements. His gaze hardened. Ethan, you've been keeping a predator in your house. Ethan swallowed his throat painfully dry. The little cub pressed gently against his hand, chirping softly as if trying to reassure him. How could something so small, so trusting be a threat? But he's just a baby, Ethan murmured. That's exactly what makes it dangerous, Dr. Turner said. Right now it's small, defenseless even. But in a few months, this creature could be lethal. Its instincts aren't like a puppy's. You can't train them out of it. Ethan lowered his gaze. Emotions, swirling fear, denial, guilt, and something deeper. Shadow looked up at him with those massive, unblinking eyes, innocent and unaware of the storm now surrounding its existence. Dr. Turner hesitated before continuing. I've seen something like this before. Years ago, authorities confiscated an illegal exotic cub from traffickers. People think they're pets when they're small, but they grow, and they don't forget their nature. The word traffickers made Ethan's heart twist. Where exactly did you find it again? Dr. Turner asked. On the roadside, near the woods. It was raining and alone. The vet exchanged a grim look with the nurse. If there's one cub, there may be more, Dr. Turner said quietly. And if its mother is out there. He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan shook his head. So what happens now? What am I supposed to do? Dr. Turner sighed. You did the right thing bringing it here. But this situation has to be reported. Wildlife authorities need to know. If this cub was abandoned by traffickers, there could be others suffering out there. Or its mother could be searching for it. Ethan stared down at Shadow, who blinked up at him with utter trust. The realization was suffocating. He hadn't just rescued a helpless creature, he had stepped into the middle of something much bigger, much darker. Shadow chirped again, climbing onto Ethan's arm with surprising strength. Its tiny claws hooked gently into his sleeve. The warmth of its body pressed against him, and Ethan felt his chest ache. How can something like this be dangerous? He whispered. He needs me. Dr. Turner's voice softened. I know you care about it. Anyone would. But sometimes love means doing what's right, even when it hurts. Silence stretched thick in the exam room. Ethan felt grief rising. Grief for the bond growing between them. Grief for the uncertainty of what would happen next. Dr. Turner placed a hand on his shoulder. Right now, Shadow needs experts. People trained to care for wild cubs. People who can give it a chance to grow safely. Ethan looked up slowly, eyes stinging. Will they take him away? Dr. Turner hesitated. Most likely, yes. It isn't safe or legal to keep him, but the Wildlife Center will give him proper care. This isn't punishment, Ethan. This is about giving Shadow the life he was meant to have. The words cut deeper than Ethan expected. Shadow nudged his hand again. The little creature had no idea what was happening. No idea its fate hung in the balance. It trusted Ethan completely. That trust felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Ethan drew a shaky breath. So, what do I do for now? Dr. Turner said gently. Take him home. Keep him safe tonight. I'll contact the wildlife authorities. They'll reach out to you tomorrow. And when they do, we'll figure out the next steps together. Ethan nodded slowly, though the motion felt heavy and hollow. As he lifted Shadow back into the carrier, the cub let out a soft chirp, one that echoed painfully through his heart. He closed the door, gently whispering, It's okay, buddy. I'm here. But deep inside, he knew everything had changed. Tomorrow, the world would come for Shadow. And Ethan wasn't sure he was ready to let go. Ethan sat in his truck outside the clinic, rain pattering softly across the windshield. Shadow was curled inside the small carrier on the passenger seat, eyes half closed, tiny chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. To anyone else, it was a strange little creature, maybe even a threat. But to Ethan, Shadow felt like family. Dr. Turner's words kept replaying in his head. A predator. Illegal trafficking. Dangerous. None of it matched the fragile animal Ethan had carried against his chest. At night, the creature who chirped softly when he came home, who tucked its head under his chin, as though he were the safest place in the world. But beneath his love, another truth whispered, one he didn't want to face. If Shadow truly was wild, what would happen when it grew? Shadow already moved with unnatural sharpness. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Its body tensed at strange moments, alert, sensing things Ethan couldn't. A pup could be trained, but a predator instinct was in its blood. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, torn between panic and protectiveness. Keeping Shadow meant risking the safety of others, maybe even his own. But giving him up felt unbearable, like tearing away a piece of himself. Shadow stirred, softly chirping, as if sensing Ethan's turmoil. Its eyes opened, meeting his, a look so trusting it made his chest ache. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. The cub answered only with silence. By the next day, the story had spread beyond Ethan's quiet home. A neighbor had spotted Shadow through a window and snapped a photo, posting it online with the caption, "Man rescues mysterious puppy. Or is it even a dog?" Within hours, the post went viral. Comments poured in. Some people were charmed. "So cute. Look at those eyes." Others sounded alarms. "That's not a puppy. That's a wild animal. Someone stop this guy." Debates filled every corner of the internet. Strangers dissected Shadow's features like detectives. Some insisted it was exotic. Others warned about zoonotic diseases. A few even accused Ethan of knowingly hiding a dangerous creature. Then reporters showed up. By afternoon, 2 news vans idled outside his driveway. Microphones pointed toward him like weapons. "Is it true you've been raising a wild cub? Did you know it could be dangerous? What will you do now that wildlife authorities are involved?" Ethan shielded Shadow in his arms, refusing to answer. The cub blinked at the cameras, eerily calm, its stillness only stoking more fascination. Within days, the town was split in half. At the grocery store, strangers approached Ethan, praising him. "You saved that poor thing," one woman said, squeezing his arm. "You're a good man." But at the park, whispers followed him like shadows. "He's irresponsible," someone muttered. "That animal could snap any day." Children begged their parents to drive past Ethan's house just to catch a glimpse of the mysterious creature in the window. Teachers used the story as a classroom debate: kindness versus responsibility, compassion versus safety. But not everyone saw the situation as heartwarming. Town officials were worried. Wildlife authorities had already been contacted. Rumors spread that Shadow could be confiscated at any moment. Some feared disease. Others feared the creature's instincts. Still others claimed it was unfair for a wild cub to be raised in captivity. The word confiscation echoed through town like a threat. One evening, the local news aired a segment titled "Wild Cub" or "Puppy Community," divided over mysterious animal in local home. Clips of Shadow blinking into the camera drew thousands of views. The anchor spoke solemnly of risks, laws, and ethics. Ethan felt the walls closing in. His bond with Shadow, once private and warm, had become public property dissected by strangers who knew nothing about the nights Shadow curled against his chest or the trust in its tiny chirps. Each headline chipped away at his certainty. One night, he overheard neighbors arguing near the fence. "That animal doesn't belong in a house," one said sharply. "If it's wild, it's dangerous," the other replied. "He saved its life. Isn't that worth something?" Their voices carried through the darkness, echoing Ethan's own inner conflict. People he didn't even know began leaving notes at his door. Some begged him to keep Shadow. Others demanded he surrender it immediately. A small group even gathered outside the house with signs, "Protect wildlife," "Safety first," "Let the cub go." The quiet street he once loved felt like a stage, and Ethan was stuck in the spotlight. Through it all, Shadow remained unchanged. The cub still chirped when Ethan came home, still pressed its head into his chest, still crawled onto his pillow at night. To Ethan, Shadow was just Shadow. To everyone else, Shadow had become a symbol. To some, he represented compassion. To others, recklessness. And Ethan realized with a sinking heart that the decision of what to do next might no longer be his alone. The pressure on Ethan only grew heavier with each passing day. Every time he stepped outside, someone had an opinion about Shadow, an opinion they weren't shy about voicing. His mailbox overflowed with letters from people he had never met. Some were filled with kindness. "You did the right thing. Don't let them take him." Others dripped with accusation. "You're putting everyone in danger. Give the animal up." The story dominated local radio shows, sparking emotional debates that stretched for hours. Even at the town council meeting, Shadow became a topic, with citizens arguing back and forth about ethics, safety, and wildlife laws. Ethan felt trapped in the center of a storm he never asked for. Then one morning, amid the usual stack of notes, pamphlets, and warnings, a new letter appeared. This one official stamped with the emblem of the State Wildlife Authority. His stomach dropped as he opened it. The letter politely but firmly requested that Ethan bring the animal in for immediate evaluation. There was no threat, no anger, just the weight of the law behind a carefully worded notice. But that was enough. His hands shook as he folded the paper again. This was no longer just about emotions. Now the government was involved. That evening, Ethan sat on the living room floor with Shadow curled in his lap. The cub chirped faintly, shifting to press closer, warm and trusting, and heartbreakingly unaware of the world closing in around them. Ethan stroked its fur slowly again and again, unsure whether he was comforting Shadow or himself. He wished someone would tell him exactly what to do, what the right thing was. But every option felt like a loss. He thought back to Dr. Turner's warnings, to the terrified reaction of the shepherd dog, to the glowing eyes at night, to the experts who could give Shadow the space and training a wild cub needed. But then he remembered the first night the way the tiny creature had clung to him in the rain, desperate and cold. How could he hand over something that trusted him so completely? His throat tightened. He whispered, "I don't want to lose you." Shadow chirped, shifting its head beneath Ethan's hand, oblivious to the pain unraveling inside him. But no matter how tightly Ethan held on to the moment reality pressed in around him. Keeping Shadow meant putting neighbors' pets, even children, at unknown risk. And worse, it meant denying Shadow the chance to grow as it was meant to grow. He closed his eyes, fighting back the ache spreading through his chest. The next morning, Ethan made the hardest decision of his life. He packed a small bag for Shadow, even though he wasn't sure if any of the items would matter where the cub was going. He placed the worn flannel shirt inside the one he had first wrapped around Shadow the night they met. Then he added the towel the cub always slept with and the little toy it liked to chew on. Each item felt like another piece of his heart being folded away. Shadow watched him with wide, unblinking eyes as Ethan prepared the carrier. When he opened it, the cub hesitated, chirping softly before stepping inside. It didn't understand, but somehow it sensed the tension, the heaviness in Ethan's breathing. He knelt down, whispering, "I'm not abandoning you. I promise." The drive to the wildlife center felt longer than any road Ethan had ever traveled. His chest tightened with every passing mile. When he arrived, 2 staff members met him outside. Faces calm, respectful, but serious. They explained the process, gently paperwork, examination placement. They assured him Shadow would be cared for by experts trained to raise wild cubs safely. Everything they said was reasonable, professional, responsible. None of it made the pain easier. Ethan signed the papers with a trembling hand. Then came the part he had been dreading the moment he had to let go. Shadow chirped loudly as the carrier door opened, tiny paws pressing against Ethan's palms, as if pleading not to be separated. The sound nearly shattered him. He swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." The staff carried Shadow away down a long corridor. The soft chirps faded with each step until they disappeared completely. Ethan stood motionless, hollow, listening to silence swallow the last traces of the bond he had fought so hard to protect. But beneath the grief, a faint sense of peace stirred. He had done the right thing, even if it broke him. Sometimes love meant holding on, and sometimes it meant knowing when to let go. The days after saying goodbye to Shadow felt unbearably long. Ethan returned to a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too still, like the air itself had lost something small but essential. Every corner of the home held a memory. The blanket Shadow used to burrow into the shoebox bed Ethan had built the pillow, where the cub curled against his cheek at night. Even the silence felt heavier now, as if it were echoing with the absence of tiny chirps and soft scratches on the floorboards. He caught himself listening for Shadow out of habit. When he woke up in the middle of the night, his hand drifted unconsciously toward the empty pillow beside him. When he opened the fridge, he found himself pausing at the sight of the milk carton, remembering the way Shadow had lapped eagerly from the shallow dish. These small routines, once comforting, now made his chest tighten. Yet even through the ache, Ethan understood he had made the right choice. Shadow was no longer trapped between two worlds, neither fully wild nor able to live as a pet. At the Wildlife Center, experts would teach the cub how to survive, as it was meant to survive, with space to grow, room to roam, and without the unnatural confines of a human home. Shadow would no longer have to suppress instincts or adapt to a life that was never meant for him. And Ethan could finally breathe, knowing Shadow was safe. As the weeks passed, the uproar surrounding Shadow slowly faded. The town stopped whispering about the mysterious puppy. News stations moved on to new stories. The crowd that had once gathered outside Ethan's home vanished, replaced by the usual quiet rhythm of small-town life. But Shadow's story didn't disappear. Teachers began using it in classrooms to discuss wildlife conservation, the dangers of illegal trafficking, and the responsibilities humans have toward nature. Families told the story to their children, sometimes as a cautionary tale, sometimes as a lesson about compassion. Ethan heard snippets now and then at the grocery store or the local diner. Remember that man who rescued the wild cub? They say he did the right thing. Poor guy. Must have been hard. The world had formed its conclusion. But for Ethan, the experience remained something deeper, more personal, carved permanently into his life. He thought often about that rainy night on the lonely country road. The moment he saw the trembling shape in the grass, the way Shadow had clung to his fingers, tiny claws scraping desperately for warmth. That memory lived inside him like a soft bruise, tender but precious. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Ethan walked along the same road where he had first found Shadow. The path felt familiar in a new way, as though the night itself remembered the frightened cub shivering beneath the tall grass. Ethan would pause, listening to the rustling wind, imagining for a moment that he heard a soft chirp echoing across the darkness. Even though Shadow was gone, the bond between them felt alive. He often wondered how the cub was doing now, whether it had grown stronger, whether it was learning to run, to climb, to howl. He liked to picture Shadow stretching its limbs beneath open skies instead of the ceiling of his living room. He imagined those enormous black eyes bright with curiosity, no longer dulled by fear or confinement. And in those moments, the ache in Ethan's chest was mixed with something warm, something like pride. He had saved Shadow's life even if the ending wasn't the one he had hoped for. He had given the cub warmth, safety, and love when it needed those things most. And when the time came, he had given Shadow freedom, the greatest gift a wild creature could receive. Ethan stopped one evening beneath the same stretch of sky, Where it all began, rain clouds gathering overhead. He closed his eyes and whispered softly. Not to anyone around him, but simply into the cool air. Sometimes the scariest truths bring the most important lessons. He didn't say the rest out loud, but he felt it. And sometimes love means letting go before the world forces you to. Shadow had left his home, but not his life. And as long as Ethan lived, a part of him would always remember the tiny creature who had arrived like a shadow in the rain and left like a lesson written on his heart. Finally, Ethan and Shadow's story reminds us that kindness isn't just about the moment we reach out to save a fragile life. It's also about having the courage to face the truth, even when that truth breaks our hearts. Sometimes we love something so deeply that we want to hold on forever. But real love isn't always about keeping. Sometimes it's about letting go so something greater can unfold. Shadow wasn't the puppy Ethan hoped for, but discovering the truth gave the little cub a chance to live the wild life it was meant for. And Ethan learned a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Compassion must walk hand in hand with responsibility. And often, the quiet sacrifices we make become the truest proof of love. If this story touched, you don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt story. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in Ethan's place?